All right, well, good afternoon. We are right at noon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Hanari Ufai. I am a professor in civil and environmental engineering at the University of Houston. I direct HURRY, which is a regional institute focusing on resilience with emphasis on resilience of the Gulf Coast region. This is the second installment in our 2025 Resilience series, a series that we have repeated each year with different formats and themes, sometimes in person, sometimes online. This year's theme is very apt. It's about water, the driving force of nature. The series examines basically the essential role that water plays in sustaining life and shaping the Earth's landscape and ecosystems and influencing our weather. We're honored and delighted today to examine in the presentation with our two exceptional speakers where we are with Houston, a city living with water. And I was kind of joking earlier and saying we should have added a city living with or without water, given that we haven't had rain in quite a bit. A few housekeeping rules before we start. Please keep your mic muted at all times. Enter your questions into the chat. I will introduce both speakers. We'll start with Dr. Petersen and then Dr. Turco. And then after that, after their presentations, I will work through the chat with the Q&A session to respond to your questions. So I'm going to start with the introductions. Dr. Tina Petersen is Executive Director for the Harris County Flood Control District in Harris County, Texas, that serves the greater Houston region. She has served in this role since January 2022 when she was unanimously appointed by Harris County Commissioners Court. Under her direction, Flood Control District carries out its mission for planning, implementing, maintaining projects that reduce the risk of flooding, ultimately improving the quality of life for all of us, basically, residents of Harris County. Dr. Petersen represents Harris County on the board of directors for the Gulf Coast Protection District, the Texas Water Conservation Association, as well as executive committees of the National Association of Flood and Stormwater Management Agencies and the San Jacinto Regional Flood Planning Group. We'll go on and introduce Dr. Turco. He's the general manager of the Harris-Galvin Subsidence District. He leads a community-focused team that supports the district's mission to prevent further subsidence through groundwater regulation and award-winning water conservation programs aimed at protecting the lives and properties within Harris and Galveston counties. He obtained his degrees from the University of Nebraska and has been in the water resources industry for over 30 years. Started his career with the USGS and then became the general manager of the Subsidence District. The idea is to really support the region's growth. We want to protect our groundwater resources through reasonable and effective regulations backed by the best available science to ensure a sustainable water future free from the impacts of subsidence. He's influenced or involved in several influential water groups, including a very important Region H planning group, which is our region, and also the San Jacinto Regional Flood Planning Group, Texas Water Association, and on a global level with UNESCO's Land Subsidence International Initiative. Please join me in welcoming both our speakers. And at this time, I will invite Dr. Petersen to begin her presentation.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rafai. Let me go ahead and share my presentation here. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to join this resilience series. You know, the topic of water being a driving force of all nature, and then specifically, you know, really looking at Houston as a city living with water is obviously a really important conversation. I think it also really ties in nicely with, you know, the goals of the HURRY, in that, you know, really there are multiple different dimensions and how we can be resilient as a region. And so I'm really, again, just very, very appreciative of the opportunity to be part of this conversation. So thank you again, Dr. Rafai. So hopefully My slides will advance. Great. So as you know, the theme of really this series of conversations is focused on the fact that, Houston and Harris County both are a region, shaped by water. In Harris County specifically, we're located on the Gulf Coast of Texas. We're home to more than 5 million people across 1,700 square miles. So this is a very large region. And one of the things that really makes this region shaped by water is the fact that we get more rain than almost any other part of the country. Except for a couple other places along the Gulf Coast in Florida, we are really at the top of the regions that are faced with the magnitude of water that we have to deal with. In Houston and Harris County, we get about 50 inches of rain a year. And the way that that water shapes our landscape is through 23 different watersheds. And so those different watersheds, you can see each of the channels that are formed in Harris County. Each of those different watersheds really are unique in their characteristics in terms of, the land, the soils, the geography, the development patterns that we see. And so really we have 23 different unique areas in Harris County that are being shaped by this water. The flood control district is responsible for managing our regional flood channels. So there are more than 1,500 channels across Harris County that we are responsible for. If you were to take those channels and put them end to end, they would stretch more than 2,500 miles from New York to LA. And we also have other infrastructure that we are responsible for. We have stormwater detention basins, we have wetland mitigation banks, we have several levees, we have a gate system down located along the Clear Creek. So we have a number of different types of infrastructure, but really all of it is centered around the channels that really have shaped Houston and Harris County. Now, we also recognize the fact that our region's number one disaster is flooding. And Hurricane Harvey is really our most recent example of really the destructive nature of water and its impact on our region. Hurricane Harvey resulted in more than 1 trillion gallons of water falling across our region. We had more than 154,000 structures flood. If we were to put that in context, that's more than 10% of all structures in Harris County flooding. And one of the things that was really unique about Harvey was, just the magnitude of the water that we were dealing with resulted in not just homes in the floodplain flooding, but actually more than 65% of the structures that flooded in Harvey were located outside the floodplain, which is really something that is, impactful. And that's why we saw such a significant amount of cost due to Hurricane Harvey. We saw more than $125 billion worth of damage. So obviously, as a result of Hurricane Harvey, we have really seen an uptick in investment in our region towards managing flood risk. That is obviously the primary focus of the flood control district is to be able to do the work to put in the infrastructure so that we can mitigate the risk of flooding. Obviously, we can never eliminate flood risk, but we can absolutely mitigate this risk and reduce it as much as possible. So one of the areas where we are obviously very focused on is working on reducing flood risk by putting investments into our capital program. So our capital program is focused on reducing the risk of flooding by increasing channel capacity, by increasing storage capacity, by looking for opportunities to make it possible for water to move in our systems more effectively and have less impact on our communities. One of the ways that this is happening right now is thanks to a very large investment due to the 2018 bond program. So back in 2018, the voters went to provide support for the flood control district by allowing us to go get a $2.5 billion bond. Since that time, we have matched those investments by more than $2.5 billion in partnerships. And those partnerships range from, interlocal agreements working with cities, municipal utility districts, the state, as well as actually going and pursuing grants. So the $5 billion that we are investing right now as a result of both the voters and these partnerships results in a significant amount of work that is underway across Harris County. Now, to be clear, the $5 billion that we're talking about, it was never envisioned to be the solution for all flooding. We know that there is much more work needed to ultimately reduce the risk of flooding across Harris County, but it is a very large and significant first step towards mitigating that risk. In fact, the size and the breadth of this program is frankly unprecedented, both here in Harris County as well as across the nation. So let me give you a little bit of an update on the work that is happening right now. We have a large amount of work. So looking at improving our channels, so making our channels so that water can flow more effectively from upstream to downstream. We're also working on detention basins that basically store water during a rain event and then slowly release that water to our channels after the rain event, and thereby protecting structures and people in Harris County. We're also focused on resilience. We're focused on floodplain preservation. We're focused on supporting our communities and the people in Harris County of moving away from flood risk and into safer locations. Let me see if there's anything else to talk about. So really in terms of impact, where we are, we've got about 200 projects underway. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We've got 20 major stormwater detention basins that we've also finished. And on the right hand of this slide, you can see some examples of projects that we've either recently finished, like the Zuby Stormwater Detention Basin and the Louder Stormwater Detention Basin, as well as one that is currently under construction, the Inwood Basin. The Inwood Basin is actually taking a former golf course and transforming it into flood mitigation. We also have partnerships with the City of Houston and Houston Parks Board to add trails so that the community can not only appreciate the flood mitigation that we're providing, but also will be able to really have the opportunity for recreation as well. So in terms of, the progress that has been made, we can see on the map that's shown on this slide, we have 54 bond IDs that have recently been completed. And when I talk about a bond ID, what that is really in the bond program, we identified a number of different problems to solve. And there was a funding that was associated with each of those problems. And those are what we call our bond IDs. As part of the work that we have been doing over the last, I would say 6 months, we have been really digging into the details of the bond program and identifying, the work that we have been able to complete, like these 54 bond IDs, and also really digging into the fact that when we started the bond program, we started with a lot of concepts. We started with a lot of ideas. And over the past 7 years, we have taken those concepts and really brought them forward into, the point where they are at an engineering level that we can begin to actually move them forward. And so that's what we've identified with these 75 bond IDs. We're really at the point where we're able to move those forward out of our preliminary engineering into design and ultimately into construction. What that translates into is 248 different individual projects associated with those 75 bond IDs. And again, we're looking at things like stormwater detention, channel improvements, in some cases, replacing bridges to move those bridges up and out of the channels will also help us reduce the risk of flooding. All of this work, we believe, will reduce flooding risk for more than 183,000 people, and millions more will benefit from this work as well. One of the things that's really important to us, and we've spent a lot of time on, again, I would say really over the last year, is beginning to dig into the details of this program, but also make it accessible in a way for the community to better understand the work that is actually happening. And so we've rolled out a new dashboard about the bond program. This dashboard is available on our website. And we've worked really hard to provide the type of information that we think that the community is looking for. Information like finances, details on different projects, high-level spending in terms of the program across the whole, as well as spending specific to individual projects, project timelines. And the thing that I think is really useful is one of the things that we know about the work that we do at the Flood Control District is it's very personal. It is very, very local, right? While it's important that we are working across Harris County, the thing that I know that I hear more from community members than anything else is, well, what is happening in my neighborhood? What is going on on my street? What is going on in my region? And so we put together a map that shows you where the work is happening. And so you can zoom into an area and begin to see work is happening in my community, work is happening in my area. And so I'd encourage you to go take a look at our website. We do have the ability for you to share feedback because, again, I think it's important that not only this information is available, but that we also continue to refine it as we go forward to make sure that we're sharing information that is pertinent to the residents of Harris County. In terms of, looking ahead, right? So the bond program was really about responding to the challenges that came up during Harvey, but we can't stop there. We need to continue to look forward as to what are the new solutions, what are the approaches that we need to continue to be looking at, because we understand the challenges that still remain. I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with MapNext, but I wanted to make sure to highlight it because it is truly one of those innovative efforts that the Flood Control District has been working on for quite a while. So MapNext fundamentally is really a modeling study that the Flood Control District has undertaken in partnership with FEMA. The modeling effort that has been completed is really using state-of-the-art models, right? We're looking at 2D models across Harris County. These models are then being used by FEMA to generate flood insurance risk maps and a variety of different flood risk products. Why this is important is the culmination of this work will be release of these maps to the public. Now, we are anticipating these maps will be coming out very soon, but at the end of the day, this is really something that we're relying on FEMA to do their part and make happen. The other thing I think that's really important about MapNext is that it does take into account the fact that we do have changing rainfall patterns in our region. So Atlas 14 is a product put out by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Agency, and they recently updated their models and their data based on the most recent rainfall information. And what we know is that rainfall patterns in Harris County and in this particular region of the United States, we have seen increases in rainfall. So our 100-year rainfall, which is what we use when we're really doing a lot of our modeling efforts as a benchmark, has increased by 30%. And so MapNext takes those increases into account. Another effort that we are working very hard on is our SAFER study. SAFER stands for Solutions for Advancing Flood Risk. Solutions for Advancing Floodplain Evaluations and Resilience. And really what this study is focused on is looking in a very comprehensive way across Harris County about flood risk. Now, there is a lot of work that we have done in a lot of different studies, but we have never really taken the approach to look across Harris County in this very comprehensive way. We are looking at large-scale flood risk solutions, which, we are partnering with the Army Corps of Engineers. And the type of solutions that we are looking at on this study are things like tunnels, nature-based solutions, and we're comparing those to our traditional solutions. The reason that we are undertaking this magnitude of a study is because we do believe that there is the need and the potential for partnership with the federal government to help us advance some of these large-scale transformational solutions. And in order to do that, we need to take a very deliberate approach to this work. And so the work that is happening right now is really focused on first understanding the risk, moving into understanding what are the solutions and how do they compare, so that we can ultimately identify a solution at the end of the day. We've recently completed some public engagement on this study. We do expect there will be another round of public engagement next year. And at the end of next year, we are anticipating a draft report will be developed, with the final report being submitted for federal review in early 2027. But I encourage you to track this study. Please participate in the public meetings and when they come up again in early 2026. And then finally, a third effort that we have underway right now is our flood resilience plan. This is really a completely different way of looking at flood resilience for Harris County. Certainly, we have the flood control district. Our number one focus, our mission is solidly focused on flood resilience. What makes this plan unique is the fact that it goes beyond infrastructure. We're looking across Harris County in terms of not just flood resilience and not just infrastructure, but we're looking at public health. We're looking at emergency management. We're looking at housing. And the solutions and the outcomes that we are going to be considering as part of this plan, again, go beyond infrastructure. It's going to be looking at policies. It's going to be looking at programs and community capacity building, which I think is really a very unique way of looking at this, at least from a Harris County perspective. And I think the other thing that is really important as part of this plan is a strong public engagement component. So the flood resilience plan is really a plan that is being created in partnership with the Community Flood Resilience Plan, Community Flood Resilience Task Force. And this task force has really made it clear that community engagement is key to developing a plan that is going to be foundational for the work that we do at the Flood Control District, as well as all the other departments. We have just recently completed our first round of public engagement for the flood resilience plan. We will be again going out for additional public engagement in 2026. And this is really a plan where, we want to hear from people as to what are the priorities so that we can make sure to reflect that in this plan. And so, I think our intent with this presentation today was really to give a flavor of, the work that is happening at the Flood Control District, but also some of the forward-looking efforts that we have underway, because we really need to be balancing both, right? We need to continue to push forward on mitigating flood risk and push forward in implementing the bond program, as well as maintaining our infrastructure. And at the same time, we also have to be looking forward to identifying new approaches and new strategies to mitigate flood risk. And at the end of the day, our focus is truly on doing this with the mindset of improving the quality of life across Harris County. So Hanadi, I think I will turn it back over to you, and happy to answer questions when they come up.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation and briefing on what to look forward to and examine with upcoming activities. We're going to switch gears to Mike, if you don't mind unsharing, so he can share his screen. And Mike, with my sincere congratulations on awarding you a honorary PhD. I just realized that you completed a master's but not a doctorate. So with that in mind, welcome again, and please share screen and so we can listen to your presentation.
Of course, and yeah, thank you for that honorary doctorate. I'll be by to pick it up. It's always it's always a lot of fun. I've been in the water industry for some time, done a lot of work and across the U.S.
Right?
and
I mean, it sounds like you should have one anyway. So go.
well, yeah, maybe someday. We'll see what happens. We'll see. There's still time. There's still time.
All right.
But thanks for having me today. I'm certainly excited to be a part of this discussion today, and certainly take any opportunity I can to share the message of the water challenges and successes that we have in the Houston area with Dr. Petersen and the fine work being done by the Harris County Flood Control District. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit today about subsidence, which is really kind of a unique issue that we have here in the Houston region. It's not really all that unique to the world, certainly into the United States. I think a lot of times we think that subsidence is an issue that only impacts us, but um, actually it's an issue that we see worldwide and throughout the United States. For those of you who don't know, subsidence is a lowering of the land surface elevation. And we can see that, and it's been observed in many locations throughout the United States. The San Joaquin Valley in California is a great example of that. And the picture there you see at the left-hand side of that slide shows Dr. Poland out in the San Joaquin Valley, and those the numbers there on that telephone pole were where the elevation of land surface was on those years. So they've had substantial amounts of land surface elevation loss over the years, and even as recently over the last decade, they can see subsidence rates there on the order of a foot per year. Um, Different climate. They don't get all the rainfall we get, a little bit different situation, but certainly a subsidence issue there. But we've also seen it in places like Arizona, Nevada, the Louisiana Gulf Coast, and New Orleans, and along the eastern coast as well. Internationally, places like Japan, Jakarta, actually moving their capital because of subsidence. The Netherlands. All these areas are areas where we see subsidence. Venice is another example where groundwater withdrawal or particular soil properties are responsible for a loss in land surface elevation over time. And it's a big issue. It's not just an issue for the for the coastal areas. This can also be an issue inland as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, like I mentioned, subsidence is a reduction in land surface elevation over time. In the Gulf Coast region of Houston, it's really focused and primarily caused by the depressurization of our aquifer system through the development of groundwater supplies. And this little cartoon here to the right is intent to try to, generally show how that mechanism works. Our aquifer system here is called the Gulf Coast Aquifer System. In USGS speak, it's the coastal lowlands, but it's essentially an accretionary wedge of transgressive and regressive sands and clays, beach sediment that's got sand lenses and clay lenses that aren't laterally extensive. They aren't all that thick, but there's a lot of them. And when they were deposited under pressure during flood events. And when they were developed, beginning back in the late 1800s, that groundwater withdrawal began to depressurize this artesian system. For those of you that are from the Houston area, we have a town just north of Houston called Spring. Well, it was named that because there used to be springs there, and of course there's not anymore because of the depressurization of the aquifer. But that depressurization is what makes the clay lenses in our aquifer system the clay grains in those lenses begin to reorganize and lay down flat. And that's what this cartoon shows. And that compaction of the clay in our system is what we see at the land surface as subsidence. So it can have a lot of different consequences, and we'll go over some of those. But it's not just a coastal issue. And as we'll see later on in some of the graphics, as subsidence, as the stress field of groundwater development in our area extends to the north and further inland, we begin to see the expansion of groundwater level decline in those areas, but also subsidence as well. Some of the impacts for subsidence are really quite intuitive, right? I mean, you're living in a coastal environment, land surface elevation decreases, and you can expect to see more inundation from coastal storm surges. You can see more inundation from sea level rise. You can see more inundation you see loss of wetlands. but also inland flooding as you have differential subsidence across the many basins that cross Harris County and even Galveston County. We can see inland subsidence related to flooding in areas, and we'll show some pictures of that later on. But here's some examples of what we see on the landscape. That well all the way over there to the left, that's actually called a protruding well, which to me always seems like it's being pushed up out of the ground, but it's not. It's actually what you're seeing there is a land surface subsiding around that well. That bridge there is actually over near Kema. The one in the right side of that picture is the old bridge. The new bridge is the one at a higher elevation, one of the things that Tina was talking about a little bit earlier. That bridge, the lower bridge, is no longer there anymore. And then, of course, flooding, something that Tina talked a lot about, but also the Brownwood subdivision there in just north of, just right around Baytown. What you see there is a remnant of a foundation that exists in a subdivision that is no longer there and is now a coastal preserve. So we first figured out that groundwater and subsidence were related back in the early 1900s at a place called the Goose Creek oil field. And in this case, it was shallow fluid extraction in petroleum, actually, that that caused 3 foot of subsidence to occur over an 8-year period, which for us is a pretty fast rate of subsidence. What you see there in the picture is a pump jack out in the bay. They didn't put it out there when it was dry, or they put it out there when it was dry. They didn't put it out there when it was wet. So you see inundation there, but also an historical photo from the camp that was there during that initial development, and we see earth fissures. So we know that in areas where we have water level pressure in the system declining, potentiometric surface levels declining, water levels declining, and we have subsidence, we can also see velocities on the multitude of growth faults that we have in our region accelerate. And so we'll see earth fissures, we'll see movement on some along these growth faults when we have areas that are have water levels that are below some historical benchmarks. I mentioned earlier the Brownwood subdivision down in Baytown, and this is a little cartoon that'll go through several aerial photos of how that development moved over time. But essentially, it was designed to be an executive development for folks working in the petroleum industry down there. And you can see in the 1950s and 70s, there's a lot of infrastructure went in there, a lot of homes. But at the same time, they had subsidence going on in that area. And ultimately, I think it was Hurricane Carla that came through and really put it was the last big impact in that area for folks staying there. And ultimately that place had to be abandoned. And now it's the Baytown Nature Center. But there's still remnants that you can see out on the landscape. I showed you one in the previous photo, but there's others. And it's an international example of what happens when subsidence like this occurs in populated areas and what their ramifications can be. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to prevent in our area. And if you wanted to look at this in a little bit more detail, this is some information that was pulled together by the U.S. Geological Survey, and that's John Ellis there, who's retired with the USGS. And it's an attempt to show a similar data set like they showed out in the San Joaquin Valley with Dr. Poland. And what he has on there in that picture on the right-hand side is a survey staff with years, those are years in there, of where the land surface elevation was on a benchmark that was actually occupied on all those times. So really, really excellent example on what the impacts of subsidence can have on a region. The graph on the left shows the relationship between groundwater levels in those areas, in that area, and the subsidence that was actually measured through the releveling of survey benchmarks. And what we've seen in our region is that when water levels are declining and depressurization is occurring, we can expect we expect compaction to be occurring, and if it's occurring in the shallowest sediments, we'll see subsidence at the surface. Once that water level reverses and we begin to reduce our amount of groundwater being used and water levels begin coming back up, we tend to see those subsidence rates slowly become asymptotic and kind of bounce around zero. In some cases, it may take several years for that residual pressure to bleed off. And when you get further inland, it can happen almost instantaneously. So it's a pretty interesting system to look at and study, and been a lot of interesting work being done in the area. over the years. A lot of work being done by the University of Houston and Bob Wong's group there at the geology department, and we look forward to continue to see that research develop over the years. Just a reminder, and Dr. Petersen talked a little bit about this in her talk of what we have going on here in Houston. I mean, we're the fourth largest city in the U.S. We have the third largest number of Fortune 500 companies, the largest medical complex in the world. We got the Johnson Space Center down at NASA, and we have the largest port by cargo volume in the United States. So there's a lot going on, and a lot of growth that's occurred over the last 50 years here in the Houston region, and there's no signs of any of that changing. So there's a lot to protect, a lot of people to protect, a lot of infrastructure to protect, and it's a lot of the industry and the work that's being done here in Houston not only benefits Houston, it benefits Texas, it benefits the United States, and frankly, it benefits the world. So the work that we do here in trying to protect this region has ramifications well outside of our local area, and it's just why agencies like the Harris County Flood Control District and the Subsidence District were created is in an attempt to protect and preserve that moving forward for future generations. So let's talk a little bit about the Subsidence District. We were created in 1975. We're actually celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, which is great. We're a regulatory agency created by the legislature. Our job is to prevent subsidence in Harris and Galveston County. The tool that we were given to do that was to regulate groundwater withdrawal. So our approach has been over the last 50 years to develop reasonable and attainable regulatory regulations and a reasonable and attainable plan to ultimately prevent subsidence in the future. And we do that through a science and research program that began from our inception, that continues to today. That includes collaboration with the U.S. Geological Survey, several universities and agencies, not only within Texas but outside of Texas, and collaborations with the international community like the Land Subsidence International Initiative, to help us not only develop a better understanding of the system, but also to develop better ways to monitor and track the impacts of changes in water use, how those impact the aquifer, and ultimately how that impacts subsidence in our area. Another big part of our program is promoting water conservation. And it's funny because water conservation 30 years ago used to mean developing water. So I like to kind of talk about it more like water efficiency. And for us in our area, even though we get somewhere of 60 inches a year in rainfall, we really need to improve our ability to be more efficient with the water that we use. Part of our job is to reduce the amount of groundwater being used. That requires water users in the areas to use alternative sources of water, treated surface water, reuse, ultimately maybe some marine desalination and those types of water sources. All of those come at a cost, and all of those are more expensive than groundwater. So bringing down our overall demand over time really helps everybody and helps every drop go a little bit further. And then you can't develop a regulatory plan and a regulatory approach on the scale that we have here in the Houston region without collaboration. Strong collaboration with water providers like the City of Houston, river authorities, regional water authorities, local municipal utility districts, and cities, all trying to work together, understand everybody's needs and concerns, and develop the best plan forward to help us solve the problem of subsidence in our area, which was significant back when we were created back in 1975. And with that, there's been a lot of changes in our regulatory plan, and because of that, we've taken an approach of an adaptive management approach that really takes the work that we're doing on the science and research and monitoring side and filtering that back into our regulatory plan, ultimately making small adjustments, seeing how those adjustments work, evaluating, coming back and doing that again. We've done that several times over the course of our existence. Just recently, we completed our last regulatory plan review, and the process that goes into that is extensive. It includes developing population projections and water demand projections for like in this last effort, we went all the way to 2100. and looking at the developing new groundwater flow models that help us better predict how subsidence might occur based on those water demands and population projections. We also take those models and evaluate our regulatory plan and evaluate different policies to help us better dial in the impacts of those water uses and minimize subsidence over time. And in the context of everything else, we need to make sure that there's available alternative water supplies out there to be able to offset the groundwater that's being regulated away. So we do a lot of work working with and understanding the availability of alternative supplies, and also the development of alternative water management strategies to help look at some of these frontier water supplies that may be available for us in the future. So all that kind of comes together, and we factor all that into our regulatory plan, and then ultimately set forth guidelines and timelines to reduce the amount of groundwater being used in the region to ultimately prevent subsidence. And this just gives you a little bit of an idea of how that looks, and we'll go through some of this in detail here in a little bit. But essentially, we started in 1976 with an area of concentrated emphasis, really focused on the coastal areas and the ship channel and the med center. And then over time, as growth occurred and we began to see water levels change and water levels drop and subsidence occur in areas outside of that ACE, we developed alternate and more advanced regulatory plans over the years, ultimately settling in 1999 with 3 regulatory areas and 3 timelines for conversion. Throughout all this time, though, what we were able to do is take the total amount of groundwater used in the district from about 450 million gallons a day to about 240 million gallons a day. So basically almost cut that in half. At the same time, we've seen water demand go from about 75 million gallons a day to over a billion gallons a day. So we've seen water use go up, groundwater use go down. That's a recipe for reduced subsidence in our area. And you'll see some maps and some data to be able to help you better conceptualize that and see that on the landscape. The little movie you see here on the left is really kind of a great story that shows how the subsidence has evolved in our area over time. One of the things that we actually have elevation data that goes all the way back to 1906. And we've been able to compare those elevations to what we see today. And, we had areas that had subsided near the ship channel, then near Pasadena and in Baytown, upwards of 10 feet, which in our area is a lot of land surface elevation to lose. And then as we began to reduce our amount of groundwater being used and offset that with treated surface water, we've seen those rates slow down and in most cases just completely stop. But we also saw as growth occurred, as we saw that subsidence field move to the west and to the north. And what you can see here in this movie is that exact migration. You see that stress field kind of move its way to the west. And what you'll see is that our regulatory plan has kind of moved with it. So right now, we fully converted areas 1 and 2, and you can see in this little movie that in areas 1 and 2, we don't see a lot of movement there. But when you look out in area 3, where we're going through a conversion process right now, that's where most of the subsidence is occurring today. And I'll show you maps later on to help you see that. So when I talk about our science and research program, it really has 3 primary components. And 3 things really kind of dictate how subsidence occurs in our area. How much stress are you putting on the system? How does the aquifer respond to the stress? And then ultimately, how much subsidence do we end up seeing at the surface? So by doing that, we monitor how much groundwater is being used within the district. We work with the U.S. Geological Survey to monitor water levels in all the primary water units throughout the district. And we actually work with the USGS and as they monitor extensometers in our area, which actually mechanically measure compaction in the aquifer. And then we measure land surface subsidence 3 different ways. We use static GPS monitoring sites. We use reoccupying of benchmarks over time. And then we also just recently added INSAR to our monitoring. All those 3 pieces to help us better document where subsidence is occurring so that we can better plan and modify our regulatory plan if needed to make sure that we can address that. Just to give you an idea of where all of our water comes from, this is that same information on water use, but it's every year. So, like I said before, that dark blue line at the bottom, that's groundwater, and then there's various sources above that in different colors, and hopefully you can see those colors on the screen. But ultimately, even though groundwater has reduced down to about 230, 240 million gallons a day in 2024, the vast majority of the rest of our water, at least in Harris and Galveston County, comes from the Trinity River. And the Trinity River usage has grown dramatically since 1975, and will continue to grow in the future, and particularly as we continue to see development in the area and growth in the area. But overall, you can see the impact of increased alternative water supplies in our area, and we have a lot of different sources of water for us here in the Houston region. Over time, we monitor the water levels, and what you see here in this map is a map created annually by the U.S. Geological Survey. And what it shows here is the change in water level elevation from 1977 to 2024. And the big takeaway here is that the cooler colors you see in this map are areas of rise. And those areas of rise, as I showed you in an earlier map, are also areas where we've seen subsidence rates come down. Those are also areas where we're fully converted, and we feel like we've gotten to the end of the amount of distribution between alternative water and groundwater. But in the areas to the north and west, where we're still seeing groundwater as the primary source water, in those areas, those are the areas that we see the biggest impact on the aquifer system. Those areas just in northern Harris County, southern Montgomery County, we can see water level declines in excess of 360 feet. Same is true out in the Katy area. But all of this should be intuitive for you, because we see these are the areas of growth. This is where growth is coming, are already there. All that growth needs additional water, and all that water, the primary source of water in those areas is groundwater. So these types of maps, type of information allows us to know where to look and to where to expect to see additional subsidence to occur in the future. And when we look at the actual subsidence data, this is from our static GPS sites. We have about 200 of those out on the landscape. We operate in cooperation with the University of Houston, the Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District, Fort Bend Subsidence District, and the Brazoria County Groundwater Conservation District. These sites are just a GPS receiver and an antenna that are paired, that are associated with a benchmark that we've placed about 37 feet or so below land surface. And they're monitored either intermittently, like every 8 weeks, or they're a continuously monitoring site. But what you see here is that in areas 1 and 2, those are the lighter shaded areas. The subsidence rates there are generally less than 5 millimeters per year. And in many cases, some of those sites in area 1 are actually showing a little bit of uplift. But in area 3, which is the darker shaded area there, which is the area that still uses groundwater as a primary supply, and we're going through that conversion process, we see rates that are generally above 1 centimeter per year, and some rates greater than 2 centimeters per year. In fact, the highest rate that we have right now is over there in northern Fort Bend County, which is over 3 centimeters per year, and that's over a foot per decade, which is significant for our region. When we look at that data and think about that data, and we look at INSAR data under the same auspice, you can begin to see the correlation between the GPS data and the INSAR data tell a very similar story. INSAR allows us to look in between those data points, and really gives us a good representation of the complexity of the subsidence field in our area. Again, areas to the west in the Katy, northern Fort Bend County, western Harris County, northern Harris County, southern Montgomery County, those are the areas where we're seeing the most subsidence today. That being said, you can pick out some other things that maybe we wouldn't be able to see with our static network, like this area of a little bit over 1 centimeter per year near Pasadena, but also an area of greater than 2 centimeters per year out in Chambers County, just across the Harris County border. Again, associated with areas of growth or other types of of fluid development in the region that we're going to have to go back and investigate. But bringing all these data sets together really helps us better understand how our regulatory plan is working, where we need to make adjustments, and really, for the most part, who do we need to go contact and talk to make sure that they understand the impact of that water development in their area. So having Instar in combination with our GPS network really helps us just as much from a reconnaissance tool as it is from actually monitoring subsidence over a long period of time. So I talked a little bit earlier about water conservation. It's again a really important part about what we do, and it really impacts all water supplies. We've had a very strong education program on the landscape since the late 1990s that focused on third through sixth grade students to educate them on the water cycle, where their water comes from, and how subsidence works. It's sponsored by local water users, so it's a great opportunity for collaboration. It really gets us out on the landscape with students. Annually, we're since COVID, prior to COVID, we had about 50,000 students in the program every year. Since COVID, those numbers have come down, but we're starting to see those numbers come back up again. But right now, we get about 25 to 30,000 students a year in the program, which is great. And it really gives us an opportunity to get information out there about water efficiency. And one of the ways we do that outside of the education program is with our smarteraboutwater.org channel. Smarter About Water is a website that's available to everybody. It includes a lot of tools and information that can be used by local residents, by mud districts, cities. Things can be taken off of there and shared. And it's intended to be a one-stop shop and water efficiency resource for our region to help folks get the message out on water efficiency. We've been working with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension on the Water My Yard program. The Water My Yard program is great. We have I think 6 sites across the region right now that feed information into this network that can be used by anyone. It's free. There's an app associated with it. You can put in a little information about your irrigation system, and it'll tell you how long and you should run your system, or if you should run your system at all, based on real-time climate data in our area. So it works really well, and looking forward to seeing more participation in that. And then recently we've added our water conservation grant program, and that program is great because it allows people to apply for funding to do water conservation and water efficiency programs in their own backyard. So we've done things like using satellite information to look for leaks in water systems. We've done things working with local ISDs to modernize their irrigation system to reduce the amount of water they use to irrigate their fields, their sports fields. Recently, we just worked on a reuse project with the mud district on the north side of town to help them reuse some of the water they're using for irrigation. So a lot of opportunities there. It's an open application process. And if you want more information on that, there's that QR code there. But it's a program that we're really excited about and looking to get more participation in moving forward. And like I mentioned before, all the work that we've done and all the work that is done on the water side in our area really doesn't happen without collaboration. We've done a lot of work in trying to work with folks to get a better understanding of their needs and limitations, and then help educate on the requirements and the needs to prevent subsidence in our area, and finding that middle ground so that we can solve these problems without creating a bunch of new ones. And I think it's been very successful over the last 50 years. We coordinate very closely with folks in our region. Obviously, a lot of different agencies are impacted if the land surface elevation is allowed to continue to decline. So they expect us to do our job to prevent subsidence, and we work with them to make sure that they have all the information they need to do their engineering and other work as well. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. We do have a whole bunch of questions, so I invite Dr. Petersen to join us back up, and I will moderate and present the questions and gain your input. So first question to Dr. Petersen from Desta. She says, he or she, my apologies, say, does MapNext take into account the results of all of your flood risk reducing efforts for the neighborhood communities benefiting from these projects?
So that is a great question. And one of the things that we were able to do was take into account the major flood mitigation projects that have been undertaken really since over the last decade. So the last major update to our floodplain maps was in 2001 following Tropical Storm Allison. And so any new projects, any new major flood mitigation efforts that have taken place since then would be what has been incorporated into the MapNext models. So yes, absolutely, those models are taking into account those benefits. And what I'll tell you is, you will see the impact of some of the major federal programs on the floodplains when those maps are released.
Thank you. Mr. Lee says, thank you very much for the great talk. You mentioned about cutting edge modeling in MapNext. I think drainage pumping operations in urban areas are important in flood events. Are there any modeling works incorporating these drainage pumping processes into the model? And if so, can you provide a link or some info on the topic?
So that's another great question. So one of the things that, it's really kind of a philosophical decision about incorporating pumping or not, right? So the flood control district has historically focused on gravity. Gravity is very reliable. It works whether or not we have electricity. It works whether or not, the generators are pumping or not. So that has been a decision that the flood control district has made historically. Now, I will tell you two things on this point. One is with that recognition that really gravity-based systems will always remain the foundation of anything that the flood control district does. We have initiated a pilot looking at pumping in a detention basin. And so basically the approach, and this is still very early in the pilot stage, so we don't have any information to share yet. But basically the approach would be to if there's a detention basin, it currently has water that is stored in that basin. The approach would be to pump down that basin ahead of a storm so that we send the water downstream ahead of any storm. Because one of the things that we also have to manage is to make sure that by doing a pump system, we are not transferring risk to someone else downstream. So there's a lot of complexity here, but in the way that we've currently structured it, we're able to manage this. And so this is something that we will be looking at least, in terms of effectiveness, the ability to, continue to operate this system in all conditions, and also what is the cost? Because obviously maintaining an actively managed system is quite expensive compared to, what we do now, which is rely on gravity. The other thing that I would say is one of the transformational solutions that we are looking at with the SAFER study is large diameter stormwater pipes. And so again, while gravity may be the primary focus for these tunnels, we also recognize that there are lots of different other types of water resources that are transferred through pump systems. Our water supply is pumped. Our wastewater through lift stations is pumped. And so we have included exploring what a pumped system would look like in these large diameter stormwater tunnels. So again, that is a very early stage investigation, but I think the point of pump systems and the need to continue to make sure that we're looking at them and make sure that we're ultimately selecting the best solution and the best approach is certainly appreciated.
Thank you for that. Another question from Mr. Lee, but this is for Mike. He says, hi, Mike, great to see you here and great talk. I'm just wondering, can nature-based solutions such as wetland restoration will still be effective in regions with severe subsidence? And the second part is, have there been studies analyzing the spatial overlap between areas of highland subsidence and recurrent flooding in Houston?
Well, thank you for that. On the wetland side, a lot of the work that's been looking at wetlands as saw wetlands loss because of subsidence. Now, one of the challenges that we have along the Texas coast is although the subsidence induced by groundwater withdrawal has been essentially ceased because most of the water use in that area is almost entirely not groundwater. But we still have a natural compaction that occurs in the system of about 2 or 3 millimeters per year, and we have sea level rise, and we have a sediment choked system that isn't getting the sediment to replace the barrier island. So there's a lot of things going along in the coastal wetlands areas that can impact um, how those wetlands survive. So I think that that's a pretty complicated scenario, but I think some nature-based solutions to rebuild and revitalize the sediment load into those areas, I think is something that's worth looking at. Um, remind me of the second part of that question.
It was on if there were studies analyzing the spatial overlap between areas of highland
Yeah.
subsidence and recurrent flooding.
Yeah. So, in the areas where we've seen these types of things occur, where we're having subsidence going on right now, you look back at most recent floods, Tax Day flood, Memorial Day flood. These are areas where we've seen obviously flooding occur. We have recently done studies that have looked at the impact of projected future subsidence on the economic impact on future subsidence on flooding and the economics of that. We just recently wrapped that up, and you'll see information on that on our website here coming up shortly. But ultimately, there's a lot of different data sets that could be pulled together, but there's a lot of different pieces that tie into the whether or not a place floods or not. And certainly, Dr. Petersen can speak better to that than I. But subsidence is a contributing factor. But there are other contributing factors as well, and I think trying to pick out those pieces that we can effectively manage and get rid of has been the approach. But there's a lot of pieces that can tie into whether or not a place floods, and ultimately, the rainfall is a big piece of that. And one of the things that we do expect to be dealing with more moving forward is more rainfall, more intense rainfall, and issue.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. The next question will be to both of you, and I'll ask Dr. Petersen to go first, and then Mike, you can go next. But it's from Zanina Vilmont. She says, could it be an option to use harvested rainwater, keep it as clean as possible, and pump it back to the ground aquifer in order to offset the groundwater extraction and prevent further subsidence? Dr. Petersen, you want to weigh in first, and then we'll go to Mike?
Well, certainly, rainwater harvesting can be a very local scale approach to managing our stormwater. We at the flood control district don't necessarily look at it as a strategy for regional scale benefits, but certainly on a local level, it's really a great kind of multi-benefit approach, in terms of capturing the water to reduce the runoff from entering our stormwater systems. And then it also can assist with obviously water conservation in terms of, being able to reuse that water in many different ways, as the question indicated.
Wonderful. Mike, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, very similar thoughts actually. I mean, what rainwater harvesting is a great way to offset what is typically the largest water use need in many of our homes and certainly businesses, and that's outdoor irrigation. So rainwater harvesting really helps with that. Like Dr. Petersen said, on a local scale. More regional wise, if we were going to try to detain storm water and then inject it into the aquifer and reuse it at a later date, I mean, that's been proposed and talked about. There are a lot of engineering complications to that. And what I'll say is that the aquifer system that we have here is it's prolific, but it takes a while. You can't just shove a bunch of water into it. It's a fairly tight system. And you would have to be able to know where it was going to rain and capture that water and have injection wells there to pump it in. So there's some complications involved in that side if you were trying to do like a stormwater ASR, or aquifer storage and recovery type approach. It's been talked about and looked at. Ultimately, I don't know that's economically viable to do. But that being said, anything we can do to capture rainwater and utilize that for our home or our business needs the best we can ultimately reduces the impact and the stress on the aquifer system, which in our case would reduce the impact on subsidence.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Next question is to Dr. Petersen from Marianne Pascentini. She says, could you describe the natural area preservation strategies and nature-based solutions that the flood control district has implemented to date, including their observed or projected effects on hydrologic performance, such as flood attenuation, stormwater storage, groundwater recharge, and water quality improvements? And the second part is, additionally, what future projects are being considered that integrate these approaches with traditional flood infrastructure to further reduce flood risk and enhance watershed scale resilience?
Right. Well, wonderful question, Marianne. Thank you for that. I guess I'll take this in two parts, right? So certainly nature-based solutions are one of the strategies that we use at the Flood Control District. When we look at, the work that we do on the capital side, really where we're looking to actually reduce the risk of flooding, some of the strategies we have are floodplain preservation. So if there's a piece of property that we think we can acquire and preserve it, then obviously that will help us offset future development and preserve and reduce runoff from that property. We also have natural stable channel design. So really that's kind of flood control speak for allowing channels to be able to move and meander in their own way and be responsive to really the forces of nature that and allow the channel to, if it needs to shift a little bit, make sure that we have the space for that channel to shift and then come back in. And it's really, channels in some ways are they're constantly evolving, constantly changing in nature. And what has happened in our more engineered way of doing things, we don't always leave space for that. And so at the Flood Control District, we have been putting a focus on finding places where we can implement this natural stable channel design process more effectively. I will also talk about the fact when we're looking thinking about, going forward, one of the things I'm really excited about is the work that we are doing as a result of our additional funding that we secured thanks to the voters last year for our maintenance program. There were several different focus areas that were included when we went to the voters and talked about this program. Obviously, repairing and replacing and making sure that the channels operate as they were intended was the major focus of this funding. But we also included some funding for sustainable infrastructure practices. And so that is something that we are really putting a lot of focus on as well. We have several different research studies underway looking at native seed mixes. We're also looking at stormwater infiltration as it relates to reforesting stormwater detention basins. And what we're seeing there is it is actually beneficial to reforest stormwater detention basins because it can actually increase the infiltration. So not only does it bring, additional, trees and vegetation that can reduce greenhouse gases. Not only does it beautify the stormwater detention basins, not only does it provide habitat and more ecologically friendly locations for, people to recreate, but it also is showing evidence that we may actually be able to get additional infiltration as well. So that research is ongoing, but we're really excited about that. And so those are the type of opportunities that we will be able to continue to explore as a result of this additional funding. So I'm really excited, and I know that we're, currently really kind of sketching out the beginning stages of what this program can look like. And, there will be more to come in the future for sure.
Thank you very much. Next to Mike from Jim Doberstein, he says, "Hi, Mike. Where you are seeing slight uplift, would you expect to continue to see movement in that direction? Could the rate of uplift increase over time?"
Probably not. The compaction that we see in our area kind of falls into two buckets. There's a an inelastic component that happens at depth, and that's the part that we're really trying to focus on because once that occurs, you can't undo that. That accounts for the vast majority of the overall subsidence that we've seen in our area. The other component is called inelastic compaction, and that happens near the surface. And that's likely what's leading to the small amounts of uplift that we're seeing in down in those areas. That's that superficial shrink swell, the Beaumont clay, and it can be impacted as much by climate as anything else. The development of groundwater for in our area for municipal and industrial and agricultural supply is typically much lower than that area or than that unit. So that's the part that's inelastic, and then anything in the shallow part is elastic, and I wouldn't expect the uplift to accelerate at all. It may still occur, but again, we're talking a millimeter or two a year, and it kind of bounces around.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question to you from Marianne. Can you explain how the subsidence district coordinates with adjacent counties that fall outside its jurisdiction? Does the district have any regulatory authority in these areas? And if not, how does groundwater withdrawal and associated land subsidence in those counties influence regional hydrology and land subsidence patterns within Harris-Galveston area?
That's an excellent question and one that we could talk about for a while. But I'll just say that we try to work collaboratively with all the entities that are around our district. And as you can tell when you drive around the city, I mean, most of the growth that we're seeing is in that what they're calling now the urban ring, right around Houston, which is basically in a lot of places right along that county line. So we're working with and trying to account for in our regulatory plan that growth in those adjacent jurisdictions. We don't have any regulatory authority in those areas. We have had in most cases really strong relationships with those entities between the Blue Bonnet Groundwater Conservation to the west, Brazoria County, and even Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District. Although recently we've been working with them to try to help them understand and provide them additional information on subsidence and water level change and that kind of thing in their area. We look forward to working with all of them and try to provide them information that they can coordinate inside of their own regulatory ability. But they're all different in that, with the exception of the Fort Bend Subsidence District, the subsidence districts have a very unique law. We have our own section in the water code, and we have our own tools to be able to address the subsidence issue. And in those other areas, if they have a groundwater conservation district there under Chapter 36, they have a multitude of things to consider, including subsidence, as they develop their plan. And then in the case of Chambers County and Liberty County, there is no regulatory agency over there. So it's just a matter of educating the public and making sure everybody understands what the lay of the land is, for lack of a better pun, than that in those areas.
Wonderful for that. Thank you. So the next question will go again to both of you, and we'll start with Dr. Petersen. But Simon Henry writes, what role does the community and community inputs play in adjustments to the regulatory plans? How do you balance the data with community interests?
So I can go ahead and start. I think Mike can speak to the regulatory plan aspects, but what I can absolutely address is the importance of community engagement and community input. For the Flood Control District's bond program, we have community meetings for each of the projects that we are undertaking to make sure that we hear feedback from the community and we can incorporate any adjustments or changes based on that feedback. As you also saw, we have a number of large-scale, very, very transformational, in my opinion, planning efforts underway right now. And public input is at the foundation of that work that is happening. So for us, we really believe that community input is critical. We can't meet our mission. We cannot achieve the vision that we have to deliver on improving the quality of life for Harris County without hearing from the residents and making sure that we understand what is important to them.
Great. Mike, did you want to comment on, would you like me to read it again? What role does the community inputs play in adjustments to the regulatory plans? How do you balance the data with community interests?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's as a regulatory agency, we are engaged at the local level with regional water authorities, with local mud districts, local cities, and provide them and have that communication there. We do have engagement with the public. We have a monthly board meeting. We have an annual hearing on the groundwater levels and the subsidence annually. I will say that it's not the most widely attended hearing in the world. But those information are out there on our website. And one of the challenges that we have at the Subsidence District that we're constantly working on is trying to get the message out, trying to force that engagement so that we can get additional feedback and information from folks. And we do that in a lot of different ways. We have several social media channels that we put things out on. We work very closely with the water providers that are providing the public water at their homes, whether it be the city of Houston or their local mud district or other city. But ultimately, we're about 3 degrees removed from their data, from their contacts. So we count on them to provide the information. But ultimately, we have been out on the landscape with the education program and going to HOAs from time to time when asked to come talk. And we're open to come talk to your agency. So if you have a local group or a local association that's interested in this topic, reach out to me. We'd be happy to come and talk to you and provide you more information on the district and then on the subsidence issue and the solutions that we see coming forward.
Thank you very much for that. The next couple of questions are also for you, Mike. The first one from Aaron Shu. He says, Mike, now that subsidence due to groundwater use has been fixed, and fixed is in quotes, for the coastal region, have community members expressed interest in gaining new access to groundwater? I'm wondering if people can forget about the benefits that regulatory agencies bring to the region.
Yeah, and actually that was something that came up back in prior to 2011, and there was a lot of discussion about because we've seen water levels in the groundwater levels in that area up by 200 and 250 feet. Subsidence rates were bouncing around zero. So there was a interest, or at least a thought or question, kind of like yours was, okay, now that the waters have come back up, can we go back in there and basically mine that extra water level or extra water that's come back up in the aquifer? And the important thing to remember, and 2011 really highlighted this, is that it's a pressure system, and really what happens in the system is that when we see compaction occurring, we're depressurizing the clays. When the compaction stops and subsidence stops, that depressurization has stopped, at least for the most part. And then what we saw in 2011 with the drought of 2011, if you remember back that far, we saw water levels go back down. They did not exceed the historical minimum. And we saw subsidence rates go right back to where they were. So what we have in our system is a potential amount of compaction that can occur in all these clay lenses. And once you reactivate that depressurization, they begin to compact again. So the short answer is no. You can't go back and mine that water out of there now and expect there not to be a consequence. And we saw that. I mean, we saw that at the Baytown extensometer. I think they had 0.4 of subsidence over a couple of years. Some of that came back, some of that was elastic, but overall we saw that throughout the system. So that does come up from time to time, and we have a really good data set to show them as to why that wouldn't work.
Wonderful. The next question is from Doug Jacobson.
Mhm.
And they say, Mike, do the economic parameters for aquifer recharge include all sectors and the value of all externalities? For example, the impact on public infrastructure such as roads, water supply pipes, sewage pipes, etc., and private homes and commercial properties.
Yeah, so let me just be clear. When I was talking about economic impacts there, I was really generalizing a lot of different things. when we have ASR and our ASR and MAR, so managed aquifer recharge and specific aquifer storage and recovery are two different methods that have been talked about in our region for some time. The geology in our area, through most of our area anyway, really doesn't is not the best, not most conducive to managed aquifer recharge because of just all the amount of clay that we have. Bob Gabrish, who did a lot of the work on geology in our area and subsidence in our area, would would tell us young guys at the USGS back in the day that water takes a very torturous path when it goes from the land surface down to the well, and it does. And we know that because the age of the water that we pull out of the wells here can be thousands of years old. So that managed recharge there is hard to see a short-term impact on the aquifer system. When we talk about aquifer storage and recovery, that was tried down in Texas City back 15 or so years ago, well, actually longer than that now, about 20 years ago. And one of the issues that we also have in our system is that it's an anoxic environment. So when we put oxygenated water in the system, we can see arsenic, uranium, and other things pop out, which could be a problem. So those types of things all by themselves are a complicating factor when we're trying to do MAR and ASR. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be explored or investigated or even tried again, because engineers, like my good friend Dr. Petersen, can make anything happen. But it's just a matter of how much effort does it take and how much cost goes into that. And when it comes to grabbing stormwater and putting that in the aquifer system, I remember one discussion where they were talking about they would need 40, 50 or more injection wells to deal with a typical flood that we would have in our area. So that by itself kind of ended that discussion. But your point is an important one in that these types of economic calculations have to be compared to the economic impact of inundated roads, loss of thoroughfare, loss of jobs, loss of gross domestic product, all these things that come with additional flooding and additional impacts from subsidence in these areas. So your point's a good one.
Well, thank you very much. There were no further questions. So I want to thank both of you for spending your noon hour with us. It was very informative. The feedback has been tremendous from everyone who's joined online. And we look forward to hearing more great news. I think the message we got from both of you is you would like the public to get engaged and you would love for them to connect with you and share their input. So we'll try to encourage that as well within the Institute. Thanks again for your time. And as I said, everybody's really very pleased with the presentation. So thank you very much for making yourself available for the symposium today.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
With that, we will conclude the presentation and end the meeting. Thank you.